The pair stumbled through the cloud of pulverized bone, making for the hazy pillar of light. "He must have pulled in every loose bone in the city," said Dougal, shaking his head. "And the ghosts with them," said Riona. "It will be a while if they reform." "You think he got Adalburn?" asked Dougal. Riona shrugged. "I'm sure he drove him back. It is going to be a long time before he shows his undead face above ground, though I bet he won't be alone when he does." The air was so thick they almost toppled over the edge of the pit without seeing it. The dust cleared enough to show a huge beacon lancing from the bottom of the pit toward the sky, punching through the low-hanging clouds. Somewhere at the base were the remains of the tower where Adalburn, the Sorcerer King, invoked the foe fire. Dougal reached into his pack and pulled out a length of rope. He handed it to Riona. "Find something solid to anchor this," he said. "I'm going in." "I'm going with you," she said. He shook his head as he peered down into the blackness of the well. "I need someone back here guarding my way out. Otherwise, I'm never coming out of there alive." Riona frowned, but nodded in agreement as she went to fasten the rope around the base of a nearby statue. Dougal recognized it as a portrayal of Adalburn in his younger days, soon after he had returned from his battles with Kreiter to claim the crown. It hurt to think how far the king had fallen from that hopeful age. He, and the rest of the world. Once Riona secured the rope, Dougal swung his legs over the ridge of broken stone around the pit. He mentally overlaid Dak's map. No, Savion's map. Was that the ghostly courtier's curse, that he could not leave for the mists until the ghostly dagger was removed? Would he return as well? Carefully, Dougal climbed down the side of the pit, Riona playing out the rope from above. He could feel the intensity of the light on his back, almost pushing him against the wall. If he was right, he would not have to crawl all the way to the bottom of the shaft. The wall was slippery as well, and slicked with moss. Dougal had a hard time finding handholds. The rope meant he didn't have to, but he didn't like to trust himself entirely to his equipment. Ropes had been known to snap, and there was always the chance the ghosts would find it and cut it loose. Of course, if that happened, the lack of a rope would likely be the least of his troubles. There, about halfway down the pit, a passageway delved farther into the depths. At some distant point in time, it had been framed by a pair of heavy doors, but one was missing and the other canted at an angle, its wooden face reduced to splinters. Now it reminded him of the empty eye sockets of a sun-bleached skull. Dougal swung over to the entrance. There was a thin perch before the door. Dougal reached into his pack and fished out a small lantern on a lanyard. He lit it and hung it around his neck. He would need the light once he moved away from the foe fire. "I'm there," he shouted up to Riona. Her head appeared at the rim of the pit. "Good! What do you see?" "This must have been a secret escape route for the royal family," Dougal said as he moved deeper into the foundations under the main square. "I'm surprised to see so little security." As the words left his lips, Dougal felt something under his foot click. He recognized the sensation right away, a pressure plate. He braced himself for something horrible. Dougal froze, and nothing happened. All right, then the trap would spring when the pressure was removed. The trap was probably meant to go off when he walked past the pressure plate. That meant that if he leapt backward, he might survive. The trap would go off where it expected him to be, and he'd be just fine. Or maybe whatever it was would affect the entire tunnel and kill him anyhow. Dougal decided that that was unlikely, if this tunnel had been made for people who had to get out of the royal chambers in a hurry. The artisans who had crafted the trap would have known that. They wouldn't have put in a trap that might accidentally kill the people they were trying to protect. A smart trap maker would have it so that it would only affect people entering the catacombs this way, not leaving them. And it must be older than the Char invasion itself, made for earlier rulers. He could not imagine Adalburn ever using a tunnel to escape. Dougal threw himself backward, spinning about and throwing himself flat on his face and covering his head with his arms. The trap sprang as Dougal's weight left the pressure plate. Fire did not engulf the passage. The floor did not drop away. Instead, he heard something come crashing down into the passage, right where he would have been if he'd walked blithely past the trap. Dougal sat up and looked back up the passageway. In the light from the tiny lantern still hanging from his chest, he saw a series of spiked poles that had stabbed down from a set of concealed holes in the ceiling. These would have run him through and left him impaled on the poles until he either bled to death or died of thirst. Despite that, there was just enough room around the spikes for Dougal to squeeze his way past. "I'm all right," he shouted back toward the entrance. But Riona said nothing. Perhaps she could no longer hear him. Dougal snaked his way through the catacomb. There were multiple passages now, some doorways crushed, others as open as spoiled tombs. The faux fire had twisted the catacombs when it struck. The darkened halls here had probably stood tall and unshaken once, but now the place was littered with bricks that had fallen from the ceiling and walls. In some sections, the roof had caved in entirely, and in others, it looked as if it might do so in an instant. Finally, he reached the site of the vault on his mental map. It was a slab of stone that seemed solid enough to serve as the foundation for a castle. It showed no hinges, knobs, or other features, only a dark hole in its exact centre, just a little bigger than the size of his fist. 5 years. It had taken him 5 years to get to this point. Dougal scanned the door with his eyes and his fingertips, hoping to find some flaw in it, some hint of what he needed to do to make it swing open. Finding nothing, he knelt down, brought his light up to the hole in the middle of the door, and peered into it. He started cursing right away. "It's a thieves' nightmare," he said to himself. To work this sort of lock, you have to put your entire hand into the hole, grab the handle, and then turn it in the proper sequence. If you screw it up, a blade springs out to remove your hand at the wrist. Worse, you can't see what you're doing. Your arm blocks the way. Barbaric. And effective. Dougal steeled himself and stuck his hand into the black hole, hoping that it would still be attached to him the next time he saw it. The metallic handle felt cool in his hand as he grabbed it. He turned the handle, counterclockwise, until it reached a point of resistance, and there was a click. There was no sudden pain, no blade dropping. He had unfastened the first tumbler. Sweating now, he began to turn the handle in the other direction, past the original point. There was a bit of resistance. Was that the second tumbler? Or was it the trap about to spring? "Stop," said a voice in Dougal's ear, and for a moment he thought Riona had followed him down. He craned his head around, but he was alone before the stone door. Still, he had heard something. Or perhaps it was his own imagination, translating some shifting of the stone into words. Nevertheless, his gut said he'd gone far enough. He brought the handle back to where it had been, then started turning it counterclockwise again. Soon he felt the handle click into place. Yes, it had been the second tumbler. Dougal adjusted his grip on the handle and turned it clockwise now. When Dougal reached the point of resistance this time, he felt something sharp push up against his wrist. He stopped cold. "Good," the phantom voice seemed to say in his ear. Screwing up his courage, Dougal took a deep breath. If he got this wrong, he'd soon be missing his favourite hand. He could only hope that he'd be able to open the door with his other hand before he passed out from a lack of blood. Dougal cranked the handle with a sharp twist. The blade that had been pressing against his wrist moved away. Within the stone slab there was a grumbling as iron bolts were withdrawn. Dougal turned and looked behind him. But there was no one there. Only a blue-white mist that curled around a statue of a female warrior, and then was gone. Dougal pulled on the handle, and the door swung outward on well-oiled hinges. The vault of King Adalburn lay open to him at last. Dougal stepped through the door and into a large room lined with shelves. Magical lights illuminated the place from ceiling to floor, glowing with a bluish hue that cast everything in an otherworldly light. The walls, and ceiling of the room were made of perfectly fitted cut stone bound together with crisscrossing strips of iron. These had no doubt been made to keep thieves from drilling into the vault, but by the way the iron bands sagged violently in the centre of the ceiling, Dougal knew that they'd also kept the room from collapsing under the pressure of the fallen tower above. He hoped they'd hold just a few minutes longer. The shelves on both sides were filled with terracotta jars, each filled to overflowing with gold coins and jewellery. At the base of the shelves were piles of ornate swords and armour salvaged by King Adalbern from the wreckage above and tucked away, much like an elderly woman might hide her silver pieces throughout the house in case of burglars. Rough sacks of gold and platinum were tucked into every nook and cranny. A particularly large, iron-bound chest sat on the far side of the polished marble floor, its lid unlocked and flipped back to rest against the wall behind it. A few gold coins lay scattered about the place where they had spilled out of a single stack that sprawled open on the floor next to the chest. Dougal slipped into the vault, moving carefully and scanning for traps of any kind. The adrenaline coursing through his veins magnified his senses. While he didn't expect to find any more dangers located behind such a complicated and lethal lock, he'd known many people who died from making such assumptions. He reached the chest and looked inside. The claw of the Khan-Ur sat inside the chest, atop a bed of gold coins and precious gems. Diamonds, emeralds, sapphires, and rubies sparkled back at him in the tiny lantern's light. But the claw held Dougal's attention. 2 blades, pointing forward, 2 pointed back, a hand grip in the middle, an ung. It was set with 4 gems, red, black, grey, and golden, for the 4 children of the Imperator and the 4 founders of the modern legions. There was something else, though, hanging from the forward, upturned blade. A simple golden chain, and hanging from that chain, a locket, twin to Dougal's own. Dougal picked up the locket and held it up to the light, then opened it, although he knew what he would find. His own cameo, Jet, set in ivory. He thought of the soft voice in the hallway. "Thank you, Vala," he said, not sure if she could hear, and not caring if she didn't. He pocketed the locket and turned to the claw itself. Dougal reached into the chest and carefully grasped the claw by its jewel-encrusted handle. No trap was sprung. He didn't expect that Adalbern would have the desire or knowledge to construct a trap in the chest, but he couldn't be sure. Time was wasting, though, and he needed to move fast. Steadying himself, he yanked the weapon from the chest with a single, sharp movement. The claw came out of the chest without incident, and Dougal examined it in the light. It seemed undamaged, despite having survived the foe fire and the intervening centuries. It looked exactly as he'd described it to the others, right down to the gold plating and the colours of the 4 jewels embedded in its handle. The blades were clean and sharp enough that he could see his reflection in them, something he'd not done in a long time. He had to admit, without any surprise given everything he'd been through, that he looked horrible, dirty and ragged and covered with a thin coating of bone dust. Still, he could not hold back a smile. He handled the blade gingerly, as its construction seemed to threaten to poke him at every moment. He looked around at the scattered treasure and wondered if he should risk taking more. Almora, after all, had promised him and the others any additional treasure they found. But anything would have to be hauled back up the pit and out of the city. In the end, he quickly chose 2 small sacks of gems, emeralds and diamonds, and a good-sized satchel of platinum coins, stamped with the seal of the royal house of Kreiter. Dougal turned and sped back through the catacombs, lacing his way back through the bars of the trap, leaving the vault doors open. When he reached the pit, the rope still hung there. "I have it! And gems! And platinum as well!" he shouted upward. Riona appeared at the top of the pit and waved. The claw would be too bulky and sharp to carry up on his back, so he tied it to the rope and gave the line a tug. Riona hauled hard on the rope, and the claw went up in an instant and disappeared over the rim of the pit. Dougal waited for a moment for Riona to throw the rope back down. But the rope didn't return. Riona, he called. We need to get out of here. Just cut the rope off the claw and toss me the free end. Had something happened? Had the ghosts gotten her? Riona leaned over the top of the well, brandishing the united claw in her hand. I have it! Thank you, Dougal! Wait! Dougal strove to keep the panic from his voice. Throw the rope down. Riona's voice cut like a sword. I'm afraid I can't do that. Something ice cold struck Dougal in the heart. What do you mean? He managed, but the horrible realization was already dawning on him. Riona gave a mirthless laugh. I have what I came for, and I have to leave now. Thank you for all your help. I could not have done it without you. Dougal's blood ran cold. This was your plan from the start, wasn't it? You're the one who alerted the Ebonhawk guards. Riona chuckled. And told Clag where to find you. Almora isn't the only one to send messengers through the Asura gates. Though, I will admit that I wasn't sure about it all until we returned to Ebonhawk, and I saw the Char forces arrayed against us. Why? Asked Dougal, but he was already scanning the slick rock wall ahead of him. It would be difficult to climb without a belaying rope, but not impossible. Why Clag and the Ebonhawk guards? Said Riona. I wanted to get rid of our unwanted allies. This was supposed to be a private party. I thought you and I could pull this off without them, and if you were of a like mind, we could take the claw for ourselves. From what I knew of you, I thought you could be convinced, as long as the others weren't around. But instead of reducing our menagerie, I ended up increasing it. Telling Clag resulted in the oaf Gullick joining us, and we had to take the rat Asura with us after we got out of Ebonhawk. And the guards? In the sewers? Said Dougal, thinking the horror they had both felt killing other guards. A sad accident, said Riona, her voice wavering. I had planted myself on the parapet to wait for the guards, but you and that vegetable got there first. No, they were just doing their jobs, like the Char Patrol. You can't take the claw back to Ebonhawk, said Dougal, and moved slowly along the ledge, toward the wall and out of Riona's view. Stay where I can see you or I'm gone, said Riona, and Dougal moved back. You're right. That was my original plan when I first received my orders from Almora to enlist you to find the claw. I thought it my chance to return to Ebonhawk as a hero, as opposed to someone who aided deserters. But after we talked on the wall, I realized you were right. The Char would stop at nothing if they knew. No, I could not give the claw to Ebonhawk or to Almora. Then what are you going to do with it? Said Dougal, looking around. Perhaps if he could grab a rock, he might be able to stun her at a distance? It seemed a pitiful chance. The Flame Legion, said Riona, brightly now. I'm going to give it to the Flame Legion. What? Dougal almost shouted. Think of it, Dougal, said Riona. If the Flame Legion gained the claw, there would be a civil war. The Char women, like Ember, would rebel at once, but there would be enough of those Char in the other legions who would follow a new Khaner to schism the legions. The Char would collapse in a civil war, and we could break the siege, pitting one side against the other. The humans would be able to retake Ascalon. We would be able to retake Ascalon. Dougal's mind raced, and he said, So, you caught that Flame Legion soldier after all. And made a deal, said Riona. The others trusted you, said Dougal. Colleen, Cranks, Gullick, even Ember. Why should we care? They're not even human, Riona scoffed at him. I'm a true daughter of Ebonhawk. You should be a true son. You know what happens to Ebonhawk if the Queen and this truce faction manage to forge some kind of agreement? We lose. It's only a matter of time before the Char betray us, and Ebonhawk falls. Dougal gawked at her. I trusted you too. You helped me believe. I thought I trusted you, said Riona. I really did. I thought you were smart enough to see how things were. Everything I knew about you, from when you and the others deserted me, told me I could convince you. But no, you are still haunted by your late wife. Wife! When you told me, I knew it would be near impossible to convince you. You're still in love with a dead woman. That's why you really came here, isn't it? We can talk, said Dougal, mentally planning handholds on the slick wall. He set down the bag of platinum coins. It would just slow him down. We can't, said Riona. When I was attacked by ghosts, you called out her name, not mine. You still love her, Dougal. You came here to find her, and now I'm leaving you with her. Both of you can remain together in death. Riona laughed. But her laugh turned into a scream of pain and surprise. Her silhouette disappeared from the top of the pit. There was a feral growl and the clash of metal on metal. Dougal ran to the base of the wall and started climbing. He did not know if he could make it in time or what he would do once he reached the top, but he knew one thing. Ember Doomforge was still alive.